Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has announced that he will stop implementing all agreements with Israel. This is a suspension of those agreements with Israel, which include all sorts of factors such as water and, most importantly, security as well. Now, this has happened in the past where President Abbas has also threatened to do so, but has not actually implemented and gone through with such threats. Will this occur this time? This seemingly is in reaction to the demolitions of Palestinian homes in Wadi al-Hummus, and of course, the increasing pressure on the Palestinian Authority and Palestinians in general regarding the quote-unquote deal of the century and other such factors as well. Now, another important thing that President Abbas mentioned was that the reconciliation deal that had been agreed upon in Cairo in 2017, he wants that also to progress and to move now to the next step. Will that occur? Because that would have obviously mean further unity within Palestinians and therefore strengthening their hand going forward. Let's discuss that all a bit further. We're now joined by Daoud Kuttab, who is a journalist and columnist. He's joining us now from Amman in Jordan. We're also joined by Joseph Sokhon, who is a PhD candidate in international relations. He's a researcher with a focus on geopolitics. He's joining us now from Beirut. Joseph and Daoud, thank you both for joining us. Daoud, I wanted to start with you. What do you make of President Abbas's threat that he may suspend all agreements with Israel?
Well, I think it's something that has been long overdue since the Palestinian National Council made a decision saying that calling on or actually deciding that the government should suspend all its relations with Israel. The problem is that unless there is a mechanism for an alternative way of dealing with the occupiers, this really will not be able to, he will not be able to implement this agreement. The problem with this is that Israel controls all levers of movement, of policy, of money, and without an alternative, the only thing that Palestinians can do is stop cooperating on a security level, which will really escalate the situation between the Palestinians and the Israeli occupiers.
So, Joseph, do you think that the Israelis will be worried if this were to go through?
I think that the Israelis are not really afraid of this, but actually the credibility of the Palestinian Central Council is under check right now, and they are watching if they are gonna really implement it as they did in previous decisions, and which were not implemented. They only announced it. And also, I would like to mention the Palestinian Authority now is facing a financial crisis. They need money, even though they announced they will not have every agreement with Israel, and they will put mechanisms. But who will implement them? They need the money. They need the support of the Palestinians in order to do that. Otherwise, it will only be just a claim.
And you know, this issue of money, Daoud, which is obviously vital because, you know, Israel's begun deducting $10 million a month from tax revenues that it collects on behalf of the Palestinians. And obviously then that's corresponding to amount that the Palestinian authorities pays to families of prisoners or directly even to inmates in Israeli jails. Do you think that with this deal of the century talk, as you know, as we've been hearing on the part of Jared Kushner and others, where they're essentially dangling money in front of the Palestinians, do you think that this then makes such a deal even more possible because of the financial crunch in Palestine?
On paper, it might sound like it would make it more possible, but in reality, the pressure on the Palestinian government is to break off relations with Israel and to find alternative deals. They've gone to Iraq, they've gone to Jordan, and they're trying to find ways to replace the Israelis for things like energy, oil, and so on. The Palestinian government and Mr. Abbas is under a lot of pressure because he has not reacted against the Israelis, even though they've encroached on Palestinian territory. What happened last Sunday was that the Israelis demolished houses in areas that are under direct control of the Palestinian Authority, which made the Oslo Agreement really obsolete, because if you cannot protect your own areas and the building permits that you give to the Palestinians, people don't really have much faith in these. So I think it was what they did was more of a public relations move to kind of ensure that Palestinians continue to support Mahmoud Abbas and his government, but they will not accept the money in a direct way. I think they might find alternative ways to accept the money, but directly, I think they cannot come down the tree that they've climbed.
And Joseph, on that point of the Oslo Accords, genuinely, obviously, as Daoud there correctly pointed out, Wadi al-Hummus and these areas are within Palestinian control, even officially. So I wonder, what does that say about the weakness or the perceived weakness of Mahmoud Abbas and his security forces, etc.?
I don't think Israelis see Mahmoud Abbas weak. He is vital for the security because he is the only one who has influence inside Gaza and the West Bank, and he has employees, the employees who administer both territories. So I think Mahmoud Abbas is vital for the security. They don't want to lose him as a not as a friend, but like as someone who is capable of controlling the situation, and that's why they kept for transferring back the money which he didn't accept because they deducted 5% of it, and otherwise they won't transfer it back. And as for what's happening, the missions are happening every day. Why now? Why these 2 houses or 3 houses or 17 people who are now homeless? It's not about the houses, it's more about the survival of the PA and the survival of Abbas himself.
Okay, so then Daoud, this then leads us to reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, which and I know we've been talking about for quite a long time when it comes to this issue of Palestinian unity. Do you think that there is, in the near future, the likely possibility that we will actually see a national unity government? Because we've been all waiting for this for a very long time, haven't we?
It's not likely, although the optics are all in favor. The decision by the Palestinians to boycott the Bahrain workshop and now the decision to abrogate all agreements or to suspend agreements with Israel have been welcomed by Hamas. So on the political level, there isn't much space between both sides. And the problem now is to translate this perceived political unity into a real unity, and I think the Egyptians are playing a big role in this area, and they seem to be making progress. The last visit by the Egyptian delegation seemed to produce good results according to the Palestinian officials in Ramallah, but we have to wait and see whether Hamas will go along with this idea and prepare for new elections, which is really what everybody wants, so that we can have the elections decide who will be the ruler for both Gaza and the West Bank.
All right, we'll leave there as our final word. The clock has gotten the best of it. I do, of course, appreciate both Daoud and Joseph for their time and, of course, their insight on this important issue. Daoud, they're speaking to us from Amman, and Joseph was speaking to us from Beirut in Lebanon. We spoke, viewers, about Mahmoud Abbas's threat to suspend all agreements with Israel. Will he actually go through with it, though, is the most important question at this time. As many have pointed out, since that threat has been issued by Abbas, that this has happened before. He has threatened to walk away from agreements before as well. Is this time any different, or is this just posturing to try to get something out of Israel, America, or otherwise? And then there's the issue of reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, and that has been a very long-standing issue. Gaza continues to be blockaded. Hamas continues to control it. Will Mahmoud Abbas's control over both areas now come to the fore, or will a national unity government come into existence at any point in time in the near future? We'll have to wait and see, and we'll keep a very close eye on that here in Scope. I'll be back, though, with our next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, there is a bit of a scandal brewing, isn't there, with the U.S. military sending home now Navy SEALs from Iraq due to what it says was a deterioration of good order and discipline that caused their commander to lose confidence in the team's ability to accomplish their mission. Now, that seems to be an understatement, considering the reports coming out are of a rape that took place at an alcohol-driven party on July 4th. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about such topics, isn't it? If we're talking about overall how U.S. servicemen have acted in places like Iraq, even Afghanistan and elsewhere, we can talk about even instances of Abu Ghraib or other such instances of murder, torture, etc. We've just had recently Chief Eddie Gallagher, who was found not guilty of murder of an ISIS prisoner as well. Now, that, of course, is also a disturbing case in and of itself, considering Gallagher was found then with a picture beside the dead corpse. Let's talk a bit about all of this a bit further. We're joined by Mehdi Eliefifi, who is a political analyst and member of the U.S. Democratic Party. He's joining us now from New York. We're also joined by Dimosthenis Dimopoulos. He is a researcher at the Institute of International Relations. He's joining us now from Athens in Greece. And we're also joined by Matt Snape, who is Executive Director for Parliament Street and a journalist for Italian publication Inside Over. He's currently in Evesham in the UK. Matt, Dimosthenis, and Mehdi, thank you all for joining us. Mehdi, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of not just this case about these Navy SEALs, but overall about how U.S. servicemen have acted overseas?
Thank you for having me. U.S. service members are located in so many different countries, as we all know. U.S. service members, as human beings, are used to drinking in the U.S., but as we know, it is prohibited to allow drinking in war zone. With the regret of what have happened everywhere in Afghanistan, which we all refuse and we all do not accept, and there was an open cases, that's why we all hear about it. The open democratic system will allow the U.S. system to penalize anybody who commits such a crime. I think what we've seen in Iraq recently is due to the long period of the existence of U.S. military in Iraq. I'm not justifying this in any way, shape, or form, but what I'm saying is it is known that in any time that a crime like that happened, brought to justice in the U.S., and also the media will express it as any open society, you would accept that there is some members of society, some members of a huge number like the army of the U.S. will commit some mistakes. The most important thing that they will be penalized, and the penalty will be a severe penalty, and it will be reported and opened to the public.
Okay, Dimosthenis, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because, you know, I can go back to the example of just these Navy SEALs themselves. They refused to cooperate with an investigation into a rape that occurred by one of their own members, pleading the Fifth Amendment. That in and of itself raised alarms within the Navy and within the U.S. establishment. And then, of course, we have the case of Eddie Gallagher, as I pointed out in my introduction, who was accused of murdering an ISIS prisoner and, in fact, of another murder possibly as well. What are your thoughts on that?
The thing is that, the U.S. military is considered to be the best military force on the planet. And specifically, the Navy SEALs are considered to be the top of the top, the absolute elite. They are the people that were responsible, for apprehending and killing Osama bin Laden. They were responsible for freeing Captain Phillips in Somalia from pirates. So we're speaking about the best that they are in this business, in this job. And we see day by day, I glanced the news before joining you here today, and I found at least 7 cases that were in the spotlight this week. 1 week ago specifically, you have a US soldier in South Korea. He got drunk, he assaulted a taxi driver and stole his taxi. So it's an event that happens continuously, repeatedly. We have, even at the moment, the Air Force General, Mr. Hinton, that is being confirmed, is going to be confirmed, is discussed to be confirmed as the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff in the US, the second highest military position. He's accused of sexual misconduct. So there is an issue. Definitely, there are issues that exist in all societies, and the army, the military is a continuance of the society. But when you have the Navy SEALs, people that you accept to be the top of the top, you expect absolutely the best from them. That such occurrences are happening more and more, and at least these are the things we know, because the military, as as an institution, is very secretive. It has to be.
Indeed.
So we might not know the full extent of it.
And that's a very good point, Dimosthenis. If you allow me, I want to put that to Matt. Matt, it is a good point, Matt, that the Navy SEALs are the best of the best, are the very elite forces that the United States would bring forth overseas to serve. I wonder if these issues exist within them. And, we're just talking about issues that right now about sexual assault just within the ranks themselves. But then we also have the bigger issue, arguably bigger issue, about how they treat others, about how they treat Iraqis and Afghans and others throughout, their time serving their tenures there. What do you make of those issues?
Well, I think we need to remember this problem is, is not representative of the U.S. Navy SEALs as a whole. I mean, as you say, it's one of the finest forces in the world. I think if there are individual cases where soldiers are abusing their position, then they should absolutely be brought to justice. But whilst the threat of ISIS exists in the world and the US has not completed its job yet abroad, we need to, the Navy SEALs generally need to have the full support of the US government at all times. And those, like I say, those individuals need to be punished if necessary. But overall, I think they're doing a very good job abroad trying to stop the threat of ISIS from spreading across the globe.
So it'd be correct to say then, Matt, that you would not agree with the argument that there is a bit of a leniency on the part of the U.S. establishment when it comes to holding to account some of these U.S. servicemen who have committed what can be arguably called atrocities towards Afghans, Iraqis, etc.?
Well, I think there's certainly in the establishment, I think both the Democrats and the Republicans are united in throwing their full support behind the armed forces. And yeah, I agree. There is a certain element of whereby the establishment are trying to probably bury these issues. But unfortunately, regardless of whether they're Navy SEALs or not, they need to be punished for sexually assaulting or individuals or abusing their power, as does any other individual who commits these sorts of crimes. So it shouldn't be one rule for our armed forces. As much as the US appreciates, as much as any country appreciates their sacrifice, they should be treated under the law the same way as any other individual who commits a crime.
Okay, so Mehdi, I wanted to ask you then, if I may, I'm going to use this example over and over again because I find it's just mind-boggling. This example of SEAL Team 7 Chief Eddie Gallagher, who has been found not guilty of murder. The details, Mehdi, are so disturbing. Not only has he been accused of stabbing a wounded ISIS fighter, and though, yes, none of us would have any kind words to say about any ISIS fighter, regardless, everybody has their human rights, especially as prisoners of war or otherwise. And then B, for him then to take a picture beside the dead corpse, yet to walk free. Because somebody else confessed to it, and that too because that person was given immunity. And then there are other details about Gallagher's case which are disturbing as well, which I won't get into because they're quite graphic. But what are your thoughts about that, Mehdi? That does seem to be, a proof, if for many around the world, that listen, the U.S. is too lenient on its servicemen.
I don't agree on this analysis. I know that the U.S. is not lenient at all. It's actually the opposite. The military is very strict when it comes to crimes within the ranks. But we got to understand that the U.S. forces is huge. And not only that, because you use the example of Iraq and Afghanistan, let's be truthful. A lot of these people that were accused are contractors. The U.S. uses contractors in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and also there was some in everywhere around the world. When it comes to the specific case that we're talking about, the judges only have to take with whatever evidence he had. So the issue that Gallagher walked away is maybe it's emotional, but the reality is there is a court that made this decision. And the best thing is that we're talking about it here. It is open society. In many other countries, you want to tell me that we have angels in other militaries around the world, especially the ones in the Middle East and Africa? I think it's not justified to just pinpoint to the huge army like in the U.S. that fighting in very, very bad areas and also under so much pressure that they're not used to. Again, I'm not justifying what's happening, but the reality is for us being here discussing something like that and being all over the news in CNN and other, this is a good example on how you cure an illness like that. They are human beings, and that's why they've been brought to justice, including Gallagher.
Okay, so Dimosthenis, then I think that we're being too harsh then, because are we just taking a few examples and making a mountain out of a molehill? But there are many other examples that I can refer to. Of course, the hazing death of another Special Forces Sergeant Logan Melgar in Mali, and many such other cases. And the Navy SEAL, essentially their head, is senior enlisted leader, of Sokhon, has said that remain calm, everything is fine. These are just a few bad apples. Is that the case, Dimosthenis?
It possibly could be. As I said, we don't know the full extent, and we possibly cannot know because, as I said, some stuff are very top secret. What I want to point out is that the U.S. military should have learned throughout its wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that the most important thing when you're a foreign army in a country where you're a guest or an occupation force, you need the support from the local populace. That's what General Petraeus understood when he took over in Iraq, and he changed the whole conduct of the U.S. personnel towards the local population. They started to gain support from them. These actions, whether they are some bad apples or they're a bigger endemic problem, which we don't know and can't possibly know, is a huge risk to the U.S. operation capabilities and even to the U.S. Let's say, reputation to this world. Because even if for Afghanistan is to have peace, with the Taliban, you need people not to be disliking, the United States of America. And such actions, whether they're single actions from specific individuals that do not, represent the whole U.S. military system, obviously, which they don't, it turns the local population against them. And that's how, let me point this out, that's how ISIS was created. ISIS was created in the prisons that were in Iraq, where people which are already radical or, prone to be radicalized, were treated poorly, them and their families and everybody else, and then they turned to extremist ideologies, and they became ISIS.
And on that point, Dimosthenis, I want to put that to Matt then. Matt, a thought from you. I wanted to ask you, do you think that there's an understanding of the resentment that may exist on the part of Iraqis, Afghans, and others, where the U.S. Has been involved heavily, and U.S. servicemen have been involved heavily, and there have been instances where they have abused their authority while in the country. And do you also, I wanted to add this on as well, do you also think that the political situation back home in the U.S. with a fairly right-wing president currently in power and the way he speaks about foreigners in general, do you think that also plays into how U.S. servicemen may act abroad?
Well, the thing is, if you look back at the Iraq invasion of 2003, you had George W. Bush as president, who said from the minute 9/11 happened that the 9/11 attacks are not representative of the whole Islamic religion, but that still didn't stop incidents like Abu Ghraib happening. I think a lot of U.S. soldiers, some of them probably do listen to Trump's rhetoric on foreigners, but I do think generally, though, a lot of their actions, I'm not a psychologist, but I do think a lot of their actions are probably caused by a sense of anger towards, these foreign terrorist groups who have, like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, who have been trying to attack U.S. Locations and U.S. servicemen for a considerable period of time now. So I'm not justifying the anger at all. I'm just saying I think a lot of it's motivated by what they've seen in person and what they've seen in the media as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there at that with Matt, Dimas, and Mehdi, and of course we appreciate their time and their insight today. Viewers, stay with us, though. We're going to be back continuing this discussion, going further. Thank you for staying with us, viewers. We're continuing to discuss the case of the U.S. Navy SEALs who have been asked to come back to the U.S. because of deterioration of good order and discipline. And as I put to our other guests earlier on, it's not just really about that, is it? It's about just how U.S. servicemen have acted in many places, not just Iraq, but Afghanistan and otherwise as well. And the examples of Abu Ghraib and otherwise, of course, are in our minds and are engraved in our minds, really. To discuss this further, we're now joined by Michael Lane, who is the founder of the American Institute for Foreign Policy. He's joining us now from North Carolina via Skype. Also joining us via Skype is Lyal Sunga, who is a visiting professor at Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. He's joining us now from Lund in Sweden. Lyal and Michael, thank you both for joining us. Lyal, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What do you make of the cases, not just of the Navy SEALs, and of course, this case is one about rape and sexual assault, but just overall about the attitude on the part of these many servicemen and whether the political discussions back home and how now negatively Donald Trump speaks about foreigners, does that all play into how these men and women serving abroad act towards those around them?
The allegations are serious enough, and this is about actually sexual assault and use of alcohol, which has been prohibited in the Navy since, General Order 99 in 1914 was adopted. So it's a longstanding, very strict, absolute rule. And apparently during the Independence Day party and celebrations, etc., these things may have occurred. So those are serious enough. But what I'm even more perturbed about is the code of silence that seems to have prevailed here. That's a very, very bad sign. Sure, in all militaries, you're going to get some people that commit disciplinary violations or crimes. And we're talking about crimes. Now, it's much more serious if you don't have the possibility or let's say the effective command control over these kinds of issues. And so I'd like to see what the result will be, because we've seen some very disturbing things. You mentioned Donald Trump, and one could relate this very directly to SEAL Team 7 and the Foxtrot platoon that we're talking about here was part of SEAL Team 7. Yeah. Because it was only in 2nd July, just a couple of weeks ago, that Edward Gallagher was a chief special warfare operator, was let off on charges of premeditated murder, attempted murder, assault, and he got a minor, 4-month sentence for posing with a dead body. Yeah. So that sent a signal, I think, a very negative signal that they're
Lyal, if you allow me, I wanted to actually take that example of Eddie Gallagher that you just put forth and put that to Michael. Michael, the example of Eddie Gallagher, as I'm sure you can appreciate as well, is quite a disturbing one, isn't it? Because again, it goes to show that there is, in some ways, firstly, of course, we can talk about this brotherhood that exists within military servicemen. And while one can appreciate that, in this case, we're only talking about sexual assault, i.e. in the latest case, that is. But in Gallagher's case, it was murder and him posing beside a dead corpse. It goes to show almost, a brashness, doesn't it? And, I can do it all kind of attitude on the part of some of these men, doesn't it?
Well, when you serve in the military in any country, not just the United States, you have a camaraderie, a level of teamwork that is established. It's drilled into you during your training. You're all in it together. And so it's not surprising that in virtually all military units, you're going to have a sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, something that brings people together and gives them the incentive to, I've got your back, whether it's in a combat situation or in a misconduct garrison situation, as is alleged here. The more elite the forces, I think, the more that code of silence takes over. And so when you have something like a SEAL Team 7, it is not the way it's supposed to be done, but it is not at all surprising that there would be a code of silence and something like this would permeate. Now, when you look specifically at the Eddie Gallagher case, they had some evidence. The chain of command decided there was enough evidence to take it to trial. Charges were filed. He did go to a court-martial. But for the people who followed the trial, given the evidence that was presented at trial, there was really no way they were going to get a conviction. And for those people who don't know what happened, someone else confessed to the crime on the stand in the courtroom.
But to be fair, Michael, that person who confessed had immunity, guaranteed immunity. So, you know, it was sort of easy for a person to then say, listen, I did it under immunity.
Saying it wasn't an easy thing. I'm not even saying that it was a completely honest thing. And so it becomes up to the jury to weigh the credibility of the various people in the trial. But as an individual juror, as you're sitting there, when someone else confesses to the crime that the defendant is on trial for, makes it very, very difficult for them to find the defendant guilty.
Okay, so Lyal, you know, should we appreciate the fact, and I presume, of course, the answer would be yes, that at least the U.S. is holding such trials. It is at least acting when it finds out about any misconduct, however large, if we're talking about murder or otherwise, abuse, torture even. We can talk about Abu Ghraib, for example, and even in cases of, you know, less, I would say, severe cases like murder, sexual assault or otherwise, or even just alcoholism. Do you think we should appreciate that, or do you think that this, again, points to almost an attitude within the military when they're serving abroad?
Well, yeah, I agree with you that any accountability has to be welcomed, and there's no question about that. So, yes, I do agree with you. But I do want to comment on something that Michael said. And that is that, you know, the camaraderie is certainly an issue there, and it's a strong element, and it has to be appreciated in most circumstances. But it's not supposed to be used in a way, obviously, that where a code of silence breaks a code of honor. And that's what we're seeing. And on the Edward Gallagher case, it has to be appreciated that a lot of the evidentiary problems there were because there was a lot of resistance in terms of the investigation going forward. When the Navy SEAL team, when the Navy Crime and Criminal Investigation Service went ahead, they faced a lot of resistance, and so they got into it about a year late. And by that time, physical evidence had been was no longer available, and then we had the surprise evidence that was alluded to. But to your other question, a broad question, I mean, if you see Trump, President Trump, trying to weigh in on the Gallagher trial, I mean, that's a violation of itself. That's undue influence, sends a wrong signal. Number two, you see, for example, him appointing Gina Haspel, who was responsible for oversight of black sites in Thailand, which were credibly reported to have been involved in extensive torture, or at least enhanced interrogation, as director of the CIA. And you have other very, very negative signs of this type. Indeed. So and in Abu Ghraib, you had the commander Karpinski just getting demoted to colonel status, etc. But and other consequences. But for me, not satisfying enough for the gravity of the violations involved.
Okay, so Michael, I'll give you the final word. What do you all the examples there that Lyal just cited? And Gina Haspel certainly is quite a disturbing one, Michael, as I'm sure you can appreciate with her background. But then Donald Trump himself, came in quite directly already talking about the Gallagher case before it had even concluded. What do you make of all that? Because again, it goes back to the question that I put to Lyal. There is an attitude almost on the part of the U.S. establishment that it can do as it pleases overseas, and it'll really protect its men and women, whether they do wrong or not.
Donald Trump is certainly a more aggressive president than his predecessor. I think Barack Obama leaned over backwards to avoid these kind of situations. Some people would argue to the detriment of the United States being able to fulfill its mission. On the other hand, Donald Trump, by contrast, is really full speed ahead, all in, let's go for it. And it does create a climate where people say, okay, we're just going forward, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, as John Paul Jones said. So it is not surprising that given the political situation that we're in today, once these things become public or once they are leaked to the press or whatever, they really get a lot more attention in today's politics than they would have 4 years ago. Are there more of them? Maybe. There's certainly a lot more reported and a lot more discussed in the press. And I think that's one of the reasons why SEAL Team 7 Foxtrot Platoon was recalled. Was at some point, it's like, okay, we have to make a very public stand on this. We have to do something that sends a message to everybody that we will have order and discipline. And I think that is part and parcel of what happened to Foxtrot Platoon.
All right, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, you had Michael and Lyal for their time and, of course, their expert insight today. Viewers, throughout this segment, as we've been talking about this topic, it's an important topic to highlight because it's not just about sexual assault and rape within the ranks of the Navy SEALs or even other such forms of military servicemen who are in Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere overseas. I believe one of the guests has spoken about servicemen who have been accused of many such actions in Japan, South Korea, elsewhere as well, rapes or just drunkenness, etc. It's about just the attitude that goes into all of this, doesn't it? The fact that they went into Iraq and Afghanistan with almost this, the foreigners and these citizens of those countries should be welcoming us in, and when that did not occur, there's almost this resentment and hatred on the part of some of these servicemen, and again, back at them vice versa from many of the citizens of those countries. And then that's where then ISIS or the like also came into existence. It didn't happen in a vacuum, certainly. There was a lot of people who were prisoners, as one of our guests also pointed out. This all occurred in such a climate. Can the U.S. then continue to claim moral authority as it serves abroad, as its people serve abroad? One can obviously doubt such a claim at this time. We'll keep a close eye on how that develops going forward and what happens then to Navy SEAL Team 7 and whether there will be actual court cases and accountability here in scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.